On Sunday morning, the 7th of October 1973, it was clear to both Israel and Egypt that the Egyptian crossing of the Suez Canal was a done deal. Moreover, Israel was in a difficult situation as only 100 tanks were left of its 252nd Division to try to hold back Egypt's advance into Sinai. In order to prevent a total collapse, IDF reservists from around the country rushed to tank depots to collect tanks in an effort to reach the front before it would be too late. Yet again, Israel misunderstood the Egyptian mindset. Egypt's plan was not so much to invade Israel, but rather to get ready for the inevitable counteroffensive. Instead of charging to Sinai, which is what the Israelis expected them to do, Egypt simply built a strong defense line 3 miles east of the canal. In 24 hours, Egypt moved 900 tanks and 5 infantry divisions, who quickly got entrenched, armed to their teeth with saggers and RPGs. Israel's reserve divisions in the 70s were led by commanders who were typically retired generals or others of high military rank. Aden, the commander of the 162nd Division, was the head of the armored corps before the onset of the war. He was very experienced and did not have much regard for the man now in command of him, Gonen, the South Front commander. Ariel Sharon, the commander of the 143rd Division, was much more egalitarian in his approach, as he held in low regard almost everyone but himself, and he did not bother concealing his particular disdain for the young and ambitious Gonen. Gonen was only 39 when he took on the position of South Front commander, a man of remarkable ambition who did not hesitate to use and abuse others on his way up. Ruthless and often cruel towards his subordinates, Gonen never bothered to garner favor among his peers or soldiers, but invested in gaining the approval of his superiors and of the media. On the 7th of October, as the IDF tanks rushed to the front, Gonen toiled on his counteroffensive plan against the Egyptian army. At that very night, the Chief of Staff, Dado, approved the plan and urged everyone in the headquarters of the South Command to be cautious. Those 2 divisions are the only thing that stands between the enemy and Tel Aviv. As I aspire to be as accurate as possible, I will use in this video the code maps the IDF used at the time of the war. This is a baptized map and gives names to every ridge, junction, and road in order to ease and simplify communication on the radio. According to the plan, Aden and his 162nd Division were ordered to attack from the north to the south, while keeping a 2-mile distance from the canal. The assumption was that most of Egypt's tanks and anti-tank missiles were on the west side of the canal or just on its banks. Sharon's 143rd Division was ordered to wait at the center as a reserve force that would be employed later to attack westward or southward. Gonen promised Aden massive artillery support, but in reality, 8 lonely barrels is all the 162nd Division had to assist in the offensive. The entire 162nd Division had 170 tanks, about half its normal strength. In the rush after the war broke, reserve brigades faced equipment shortage, and many tanks suffered malfunctions in the long way on their trucks to the front. At 8 o'clock, the 217th Brigade went west and made first fire contact with T-62s from Egypt's 15th Brigade. In order to keep the flank, the 217th was ordered to stay in place, while the 460th went ahead south along the canal. At 9 o'clock, while the 500th Brigade was ordered to move south on the back road, the 460th Brigade reached Arov without any real contact with the enemy. Gonen wondered on the radio where the enemy concentrations really were. In the meantime, the 198th Battalion made contact at point 245, and the 19th Battalion kept on moving west. At 10 o'clock, Gonen ordered Aden to keep on pushing south and simultaneously reach Chizayon on the west. Aden now had to deal with contradicting orders. Not only was he left with just 2 battalions to maintain the offensive, he could hear that the neighboring division was ordered to lift the ridges on which it was stationed idle since the morning. Moreover, it was ordered to leave, without waiting for the 500th Brigade from Aden's division to take the strategic crucial positions. Somehow confused, Aden asked on the radio, what are the intelligence reports Gonen is relying on, since things look very different on the ground, and that we're repeating the same thing that happened to us before, meaning he must have artillery and air support to deal with the Egyptian infantry armed with anti-tank missiles. Gonen asked permission from the Chief of Staff Dado to cross the canal. Deeply skeptical Dado nevertheless does not want to sound pessimistic and allows the crossing as long as his conditions of forming a safe bridgehead is met. At 10:47, Sharon is ordered to leave the front with his entire division and head south in order to cross the canal near Suez City. Moreover, he is ordered to leave immediately, without waiting for another force to take control of the high ridges he occupied. Sharon, like all his officers, is stunned by this order. He's asked to take a 50-mile journey when it appears the main effort is just in front of him. Sharon firmly protested and stated that the order was a mistake and unrealistic. In return, Gonen ordered him to execute immediately, or he would be relieved of his command. Assuming there was some kind of catastrophe in the south that only Gonen knew about, the 143rd embarked on a long journey to nowhere. Even in a day which was full of baffling order, this one stood out, and I will come back to this order later in the video. At 11 o'clock, finally, Gonen realizes that Aden was left with only 2 battalions to carry off the offensive. With Gonen's permission, the 126th Battalion from the 217th Brigade was left to guard the flank, while the rest of the 217th headed south to help with the offensive. At the same time, the 19th Battalion progressed westward, either in an attempt to avoid constant bombardment or to eliminate the anti-tank missiles. The 19th Battalion managed to get as close as 1 mile from the water edge before they were stopped by saggers in the open plateau surrounding them. Out of 21 tanks, 14 were hit. The rest were busy maneuvering away from the missiles and towing the damaged tanks. Before noon, Aden realized he lost an entire battalion without any progress or solution to the saggers and RPGs. At 12 o'clock, 2 battalions from the 217th Brigade arrived to help. The 500th Brigade finally reached the front and was ordered to hold the south ridges around the same area the 143rd Division held before. The 430th Battalion was sent to block the Egyptian advance on Khaviva. The 142nd Battalion, holding station in Arov, was supposed to launch an attack against the Egyptian bridgehead. The 113th Battalion was ordered to join the attack. In front of them, they could see dozens of well-protected tanks and hundreds of infantry in foxholes waiting for them to charge. On the radio, they could hear their brigadier challenging the logic of the attack, especially when it was clear to him by now just what happened to the 19th Battalion a few hours back. Asaf Yaguri, the 130th Battalion commander, said, "We could hear on the radio the brigadier arguing with the division commander. Later, my officers approached me. They all stated that the order to charge was unreasonable. Vitkin, my company commander, who later died in the charge, told me, 'If you're going, I'm coming with you, but I want you to know this is a one-way ticket.' It was all futile. Gonen wouldn't heave to his officers, and the 113th charged alone. The 142nd misunderstood their orders to join the 113th, and instead of charging with them, supplied cover. Once again, it wasn't long before the entire battalion was lost. The Egyptians decided to take hold of the newly vacated areas of Hamutal and Makhshir. The 429th Battalion from the 500th Brigade was ordered to take back Hamutal. Once again, just 1 battalion charged a well-defended position on an exposed ground and suffered losses accordingly. While a 3rd battalion suffered heavy losses, Gonen was transmitting to Dado and Dado to the government that everything is going just fine and Israeli tanks are about to cross the canal or have already crossed it by now. Now let us pause for a moment and discuss how plausible it was for Israeli tanks to cross the canal, as Gonen wanted the higher-ups to believe. The IDF crossing bridges were far behind, and no one thought they could reach the canal on time on the clogged roads. Gonen's whole idea was to cross on Egyptian bridges. Alas, the T-62s and T-55s had completely different dimensions and weight from IDF Centurions and Patins, meaning the IDF tanks were longer, wider, and 30% heavier than the Egyptian tanks, and it was extremely unlikely that any crossing could have taken place over the Egyptian bridges. Even if somehow the IDF tanks could reach the canal, they would be exposed to fire from the west side as well as from the south and the north, without any real option to move forward. All of this, of course, provided the Egyptian army would retreat and leave his own bridges intact for the Israelis to cross over. To think an entire Israeli offense, that the final reserves of the IDF were committed to such assumptions, the whole plan was simply deranged. At 12 o'clock, Gonen contacted Sharon with a series of missions. Sharon was ordered to stop the 19th Armored Division tanks crossing at Masrek, cross the canal near Suez, take control of the city, and all this while maintaining a line until Atara. 2 hours later, Gonen first publicly expressed doubts. At 2:15, he notified Sharon he might be diverted to attack Amir, the farm. At 3 o'clock, the order came on the radio. The 143rd Division will turn back, and with the remaining daylight, stop the Egyptian advance at the farm. The euphoric optimism of the morning morphed quickly into panic mode. Both were hardly sustained by reality. Gonen now urged Sharon to dash north and face the Egyptian offensive. Sharon ordered the 421st to attack Hamutal immediately. The 500th Brigadier identified friendly fire on his forces from the east and informed Sharon he is still fighting on the ridge. Further contradictory reports about who was holding Makhshir prevented the 143rd from taking the ridge at sundown. The battle for the ridges in the center might get a separate video, but for now it suffices to say it was uncoordinated, messy, and a total disaster. Gonen is now fully aware of the mayhem this day has produced and orders Sharon to maintain his positions as the 143rd is the only functioning unit in the south. Sharon is to hold the ridges in the back in order to prevent the Egyptians taking the junctions and headquarters. With the remaining daylight, Sharon asks to attack Makhshir, the ridge in front of him, but now Gonen changes his mind altogether and orders Sharon to stay put and not risk any of his tanks. At the evening of the IDF counteroffensive, not only had the 143rd proved ineffective, diverted to a wild goose chase, but it was also evident that the IDF has lost control on the ridges, posing a significant threat to the Tassa junction. I feel bad blaming Gonen for the entire calamity, as we will never know for sure the extent to which other elements were not working due to the bewildering day the South Front commander had. The most crucial command issued that day was for the 143rd Division to leave the main effort and head 50 miles south to Suez City. If it wasn't for that order, the whole day and presumably the war itself would have looked different. In front of the Judicial Investigation Committee, Gonen testified that at the time he was certain that the offense was going great and he needed the 143rd Division to cross in a different region altogether. However, Gonen's good feeling had nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, to rely on. At the time he issued the order, 1047, there was no real contact between the IDF and the Egyptian army, which on its part was busy fortifying its positions 2 to 3 miles west of the canal. Even worse, at 11 o'clock, the entire 19th Battalion was decimated by infantry with Sagers and RPGs, and at 2 o'clock, the 113th Battalion repeated the same Charge of the Light Brigade drill with similar results. Not only has Gonen's good feeling had nothing to rely on, it was clear at the time or soon after that the evidence on the field suggested the opposite. And even if we accept that Gonen misunderstood the situation, moving an entire division is an extreme endeavor. Tanks will need refueling and refilling of the ammunition they spent in the morning. With all the logistical tail, a division will need at least 6 hours to reach the canal again. Given that sundown in October is typically around 5 p.m., it's evident the 143rd Division could not achieve much by the time it reaches Suez City. There is obviously more than one reason for such a calamity. The list of bad decisions that crippled the counteroffensive is long, and I will list some of them here. No diversion was executed, and the offense unfolded with predictable ease. The 143rd Division remained idle in the center since the previous day, affording the Egyptians ample time to anticipate the IDF's main effort. 2 days after the war broke out, the IDF realized what a difference in the battlefield the anti-tank missiles had made. It was clear that suppression fire in the form of artillery and airstrafe is a must along the tanks. Yet, no such provision has been made by Gonen. The counteroffensive he planned was not even properly coordinated with the Israeli Air Force. No concentration of power. Gonen kept spreading his forces too thin on too many tasks without ever deciding what his main effort was. Unrealistic targets. The plan to cross the canal on Egyptian bridges was, to put it mildly, insane. The bridges were designed for much lighter tanks, and it was very unlikely they would remain intact for the IDF to cross on. Underestimating the enemy. The assumption that the enemy will flee rather than fight was unrealistic. All through the war, the simple Egyptian soldier proved complete disregard for his own life. The Egyptians' devotion was clear on day one and should not have been a surprise. Command style. In the stressful, unfamiliar events of the war's early days, Gonen refused to listen to his subordinate officers, despite many of them having significantly more experience than he did. Furthermore, he failed to visit the battlefields or adapt his plans in response to evolving situations. While some of these shortcomings may stem from his own personal disposition, many of them can be attributed to a lack of cohesive governing method in the IDF. So what happened to Gonen on that day? It's not enough to say he took leave from reality. We must ask ourselves, how can a general lose his faculties and thwart his own army like this? One answer is that he was so sure he was about to win the day, he did not want Sharon to share his glory. Staff officer testified later how Gonen packed the already crowded war room with reporters that would document his glory. The more interesting explanation came from Sharon's testimonial at the Judicial Committee. The ferocity of the forces we encountered, the horrible starting point of the war. We must realize that our forces have gone through a terrible shock. In this generation of officers, there was no one like us that experienced the terrible defeats of 1948. By 1973, the IDF was a victorious army. The onset of the war simply caught them off guard on unfamiliar ground. As you probably noticed, he wasn't the most articulate man. However, with his profound understanding of war, I believe he hit the nail on the head. The primary cause of the chaos on that day was the inability to understand new, unfamiliar situations. The repercussions were severe. Disappointed and bewildered by Gonen's actions, Dayan and Dado decided to appoint a caretaker general in the form of Chaim Bar-Lev, the former chief of staff. And with limited options in the south, the IDF shifted its focus to the north.